This was a case where the client was also a U.S. Law Shield member. His case was covered under their program, so we represented him. He was charged with first-degree assault for shooting somebody in Jefferson County. And he had a number of sentence enhancers as well that, basically if he were to be convicted of it all, would have put him in prison the rest of his life. The backstory here is that he does car work, he does hail dent repair. And he was at one of his shops, and for the month or so prior to this incident, he had been employing this man to do kind of odd-end jobs around the shop. And the relationship soured a couple weeks prior because this other man had become very aggressive and violent to both my client and his staff, and my client fired him. Leading up to this, my client had also allowed this man to have his mail sent there because he didn't have another mailing address. So he was doing this out of the kindness of his heart. And ultimately, on the date of this incident, this man comes back extremely intoxicated. He's looking for his mail. My client tells him that he needs to leave. He's not welcome there. The man gets out of his car and immediately charges him, throws him against the wall of his shop and hits him in the face and is in the process of about to attack him again. And unfortunately, the actual scene goes just barely off camera, but as my client got thrown back, he pulls out his concealed carry, which he was permitted to have and was lawful to have, fired a shot in a downward angle and ends up striking this man in the leg. That stops the incident, and the man leaves, ultimately ends up at a hospital. Police get involved and he gets charged. For this particular case, the first thing that we did was the investigation side of stuff. Preserving evidence is important to make sure that we have everything available to us right off the bat. But the second part of this was a significant investigation into this other man, because our suspicions were right that he had a significant violent past, criminal history and other altercations with former employees where he had been aggressive and gotten into altercations with them. And we were able to dig up a ton of that kind of stuff. And partially that was through open records requests where we got police reports about what this guy had been into. But even kind of the offshoot of those records reports were little gems in there that would mention another name, and then we'd send our investigator to go talk to that person, really not knowing much about what we were going to get. But ultimately, especially in this case, for example, the investigator comes back and says, yeah, I talked to this guy. And it turns out there were 3 other violent assaults that this guy was involved in that aren't in any of the reports, So we got a timeline of multiple years of this guy doing exactly what he did to our client on this particular day. Ultimately, I put together a 100-page mitigation packet that laid out this timeline for the prosecutor. We ultimately embedded the media when we got surveillance or 911 calls. We embedded it into the PDF, so the prosecutor, when he was reading the story and the timeline, could just hit the play button for this media and see exactly what it corresponded to. So it was a very finished product that we ultimately provided to the prosecutor, along with basically an analysis of exactly how this trial goes if he really wanted to push it. And fortunately, the DA was patient with us to get that information together because it took some time, but we got it to him, and ultimately, he received an email about a week later, and it was about 2 sentences that said, Drew, thanks for the information, and I don't think there's a chance in hell I'm going to be able to prove this. I'll be dismissing the case. So that preparation up front, obviously in this case, was instrumental.